Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a realm where reality intertwines with the inexplicable, where the boundaries of reason dissolve into the shadows of uncertainty. Welcome to the political twilight zone. I am your guide through this enigmatic labyrinth, where politics and power take on life of their own. In this dimension, the threads of truth weave a tapestry of intrigue, challenging our perception of the world we thought we knew. In this world, nothing is as it seems, and the truth lies buried beneath layers of deceit. Prepare to venture where reason meets the unexplained, and where the unexplained might just be truth. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. It is another week going by here at Getting It Right with Rick Wagner, right here on KNZZ KJLN. Well, that's interesting. We had a little hiccup there. I don't know where it came from. Aliens, probably. I've been waiting for them to show up, for gosh sakes. I mean, please. Give us something else to do. I don't think they might bring world peace, but they would certainly give us something else to talk about. Speaking of which, people that have to go, I think Joe's got to go. I wouldn't have thought that was going to be something that is probably that's going on before. He's a stubborn and not particularly intelligent person, and he's always wanted to have this job, and he's never gotten taken seriously. I mean, you may recall in 2015 that Barack Obama, who was the president when Joe was vice president, just to remind him, sometimes he forgets, backed Hillary Clinton rather than Joe. Rumor has it that Joe was very upset by that. Well, I can sort of see it. But let's face it, over time, if you look back at Joe Biden's career, he's been passed over for anything that has anything to do with any oomph mentally. He gets where he is at by the rules of the Senate, like we've talked about before. You just stay in there long enough, and you get named to be chairs of important committees. And when you're that, you're able to control the legislation about what goes into the committee and what comes out and all this kind of stuff. So you have some valuable knowledge. You also have some valuable operational precepts that you can employ. So that makes you very interesting to people who would benefit or be harmed by some of the things that might come through Congress. So Joe's importance is kind of related to that. It's not related to anybody saying, that guy's really got it going on. He should be president. I don't think that was a whole lot of people. It's funny that people are saying that now. Apparently they don't know Joe, but I don't know what's going to go on. It's just what a raucous thing this is. I did watch the whole convention this time. You don't usually watch the whole convention because they're usually pretty boring. I missed some of it. I didn't just sit there the whole time, but I watched almost all of it. That was certainly the important parts, and all of it was kind of important. Whoever set that thing up did a marvelous job. It was quick-paced. The speakers were intelligent, and each had a point to make. There was some fun thrown in at the end with Kid Rock and, of course, Hulk Hogan. And because of that, I think that the whole thing came off so well. And I don't know if we could have done anything better. Now, President Trump's speech was a little long. I think everybody can agree on that. It was the longest speech in the convention history, as I recall. Now, I understand why he was doing that, because he wanted to cover each and everything. You can almost see the notes that he was making, about, I want to make sure I get this, and I get this, and I get this. That was a lot of stuff. And when you have kind of a conversational style like President Trump does, it's harder to keep it in time constraints. So he covered everything, and then as he was talking about them, sometimes I think something occurred to him, and he would add to it and so forth. I really appreciated his commendation of the firefighter that was killed in that incident. I think that was something that was very nice to have done. It's too bad that had to happen. It's too bad we don't really know why it happened. The person who knew most about it no longer is able to access any of that memory and or tell us anything. What we really wonder about, of course, is how did it happen when it shouldn't have? When we say shouldn't have, doesn't mean there's not nut jobs out there that want to do things like this. What we mean is that we have sort of protocols in place that are supposed to prevent that sort of thing. or at least make it a lot harder than it looked like it was. It didn't seem to be working. Why that is, we still don't really know. I mean, I was sort of stunned by the image of United States senators of the Republican convention chasing the director of the Secret Service around the convention floor. Well, she wasn't on the floor. She was up in the mezzanine or whatever it is up there, the walkway around. Then she wouldn't really talk to him. She had a very imperial attitude, which she had before. We'll see what she testifies if she has that. My guess is that that's just who she is. And once again, taking full responsibility for what happened, but doing nothing. This has been the hallmark of the Obama-Biden administration. They don't get rid of anybody. And if it gets enough pressure, someone will step forward and say, yes, I think that was, I take responsibility for that. And they just go back. They don't get fired. They don't even feel like they're particularly sorry about it. I mean, look at the travesty in Afghanistan. Everybody mentions this, but it really bothers me. Nobody got fired. Nobody got reassigned. We don't know anything about what happened because of what happened. Right? To our knowledge, there was nothing done to anyone who planned, and I put that in, sort of air quotes, that operation. I don't know why that something wasn't done. It's strange. It's almost as though Obama and Biden have a philosophy, and Biden doesn't really have a philosophy, I don't think. Whoever's, giving him information does, and it's probably from Obama, that if you discipline someone by asking for their resignation, something like that, then you somehow admit that your administration as a whole did something wrong. And you just can't do that. I don't know if you've spent much time watching Barack Obama, even off the presidential stage. He's not someone that likes to say he was wrong about something. Doesn't play well in his head. And let's face it, you got to be a little bit of an egotist to run for president or any of those kinds of jobs. Otherwise, why would you put up with that? But he doesn't like to say, oh, I think we made a mistake there. No, that doesn't really happen. But liberals in general don't work that way. We see programs and philosophies and political moves that are doomed to fail. Things that we have known through history that have never worked. They get reinvented by the progressives, some of them because they don't know they weren't tried before, apparently, and others because they think they're so smart that now they can make it work, right? I have a smartphone, so I am much smarter than Thomas Jefferson. He didn't have a smartphone, so I think I can make this socialism thing work. I think that's part of that, too. And for a percentage of the people who want to implement these things, it's a pursuit of power and ego. Because almost everything that's tried to implement from the progressive left is something to do with controlling the population. And not controlling them to, keep public order. No. No, public order is just not necessary. But somehow controlling all of your choices. And like we've said before, the reason that's so bad is not just because it's so irritating and constricting. It's because it is an assault on liberty. This whole defending democracy thing, yeah. What do you mean by democracy? That's the problem. I think I know what they mean by democracy, and I don't think it means what they think it means. But we're interested in liberty. And to have liberty, you have to have choices. You don't have freedom if you have one choice, or being told to do something by a governmental entity. That's certainly not freedom. Or just making it so there's only one way to do things. That's what they tried to do with electric vehicles. People weren't buying them, so they just wanted to mandate that everybody had to get one. Now that's dying out, but because partly because the consumers aren't wanting it, and the auto companies, except for Tesla, who's the only one out there that can make money off their vehicles, were losing their shirts. So that has retreated a bit. But they never say, oh, we made a mistake, that didn't work. It's just somebody else's fault. It didn't work because of the Republicans. It didn't work because there wasn't enough power in the Enabling Act. There wasn't this, that, but it always goes back to them being able to dictate it. Very interesting. Well, for those of you wondering, and by the way, thanks for sticking around, how the rhetoric has been turned down by the left, to kind of just smooth things over after what happened to Trump and all that talk from everybody else about, bringing down the rhetoric, keeping it a little calmer, keeping it a little calmer. Well, that's not really what happened here. We had we had some of the most interesting responses to Donald Trump's speech. Now, really, going on some of the liberal websites, especially the far left ones, and seeing what they reviewed and said happened with Donald Trump's speech after you've seen it is especially interesting. Because remember, the vast majority of the people reading their stuff did not see anything of that speech. Now they may see some pieces cut out later on out of context, and so that they can bring them up and talk about, oh yeah, see that he was calling for insurrection right there. So what they say happened tends to go into people's head who don't know better, like it did happen. But there really is some, I think, funny stuff here. MSNBC closed a block of their coverage of the convention, in which they compared Donald Trump to Fidel Castro, Nikita Khrushchev. Now, Nikita Khrushchev, I give them Fidel Castro that they might know something about that because they love Castro. They're just sad that he's gone. I don't think anybody on there could pick Nikita Khrushchev out of a lineup of 5 portly, bald men in their late 60s probably 60s. I don't think they'd have any idea who it was, and they certainly don't know what he talked about, and they certainly don't know how anything he said related to what Donald Trump said. It's kind of a shame. I mean, they ought to learn something about Nikita Khrushchev if they're going to bring him up. Nikita was quite the dude. He was famous for several things, one of which was taking his shoe off and pounding it on the table to get people's attention. He didn't have the little hammer with him, so the little gavel. No, so he had a shoe. This guy was innovative. He was a change agent, and he was not afraid to experiment. He also enjoyed wrestling. And it was often said that as they were traveling around with his bodyguards, they would pull off to the side of the road and get into a wrestling match. Now that's at least an interesting person. I don't know what it says about it, but most of these other people that we see these days are not just interesting, they're just sad. The one I really can't understand is Nicole Wallace. Well, it's just another one of these derangements. Nicole Wallace, I believe, if I remember right, worked in the Bush administration. Anyway, she was a nominal Republican. Now, of course, she is way out there on the left. She's like walking on the wing of the left airplane. And she just seems to, well, I hate to use the word hate, but she seriously dislikes Donald Trump for reasons that she goes into all the time, but all seem a little bit weird and maybe not even true. But they had a great discussion, and Rachel Maddow and Nicole, Rachel Maddow said that she knew it was going to be a long speech, but this was over an hour and a half. This was a Fidel Castro kind of experience. Oh, I thought that was just hilarious. And what they're worried about is that people are following Donald Trump as though he were a great leader, and they use the word messianic, like people saw him as a political messiah. Maddow said, at the beginning they loved it and were crying. Yes, I'm sure people were. I mean, there were several parts of that convention that brought you to tears, certainly the Gold Star families and a few things like that. I could not help but think when they said that, remember when Barack Obama, people would cry and pass out and speak in tongues and all these things at his rallies, and that was great. It showed how he reached in and just really affected these people. But now, if something like that happens, even with just crying at very sad stuff at a convention with Donald Trump, he's a dangerous lunatic. And the people who do that, in other words, show emotion on that, well, they're worse than him anymore. If you listen to it, it seems like it. They should know better, I think is what you get out of that now. Let's see. And they had their one of their tame so-called historians. The historians they have on are really not, and they're not very good just because I don't like their opinion. But because they're so radical, and I can't figure out where their opinion comes from. The historians that I seem to follow, mainly Victor Davis Hanson, I understand what he's saying. I've read what he's saying, and I understand his thinking on that. When he comes up with it. I mean, he's a lot smarter than me, but I understand it but these guys, I don't understand where their thinking comes from. I think that instead of looking back at the past and trying to figure out what happened, they look at themselves and their internal philosophies and feelings and whatever else is in there, and they try to go back historically and find things to support that. That's sort of running the experiment backward. And we seem to see a lot of that. Anyway, their historian, I can't pronounce his name. It's Beschloss. It's Beschloss. Yeah, it's an interesting name. He said that it was a real historical moment, but he warned, we could be in a dictatorship next year if Donald Trump is elected and carries through on his threats and carries through on the threats to suspend the Constitution. That's what's at stake. I watched that speech pretty carefully. I didn't hear anything about suspending the Constitution. Actually, I heard some things throughout that convention about how great the Constitution was, and we're trying to get people to follow it again. So he apparently is hearing something that I was not. Now, usually I would say that these voices are probably in his head, and this is not a good thing. Mr. Beschloss, listen, these voices don't follow what they're going to do. They're going to start telling you to do things pretty soon. Run around with an eggplant on your head or something. No, you don't. Because apparently you're hearing things nobody else is. But this temperature certainly was not lowered. And as a matter of fact, some of the left were just beside themselves. Speaking of which, beside themselves on the left, I mean, think about Colbert, right? Poor Stephen Colbert was very upset that people seem to like Trump's speech. Now, Colbert is, at some point, and I don't think it's about everything, when it comes to politics and how he feels about things, it seems to be deeply disturbed. He, like our last historian, likes to talk about things that I don't hear or see in other people's discussions. They live within his head. Now, there's a lot of reasons why that can happen with people, but a very common one is those scenarios in your head are what you would do if you were in charge. That's why you think about it all the time, especially when they take things out of context. So it isn't like he says something that's incorrect and it brings you, oh my gosh, did you hear that? And you understand what he said, and then you might just misinterpret a little bit. No, they just take anything and run with it. It's because they have a preconceived notion, just like we were talking about the historian. They run their lives backwards when they look at Donald Trump, or conservatives for that matter. They decide they used to be just bad. Now, of course, they're evil. Remember the old saying, and I think it is a good one, that we never quite get it because we think they're wrong and they think we're evil. I mean, that's kind of what they're doing here. This is what the result of that is. So when you start working backward like that to study what somebody said and pick things out that you can, out of context, or just words, like a bloodbath. That was a great one. He was talking about there would be a bloodbath in the automotive section. And now, I mean, they have it out there like he was talking about some sort of insurrectional military action or something. That completely wrong. I mean, not even close to being what he was talking about. And I just can't understand how that moves the conversation forward. And I do understand how it creates more and more division. And not just division. This isn't just division. This isn't like Eisenhower and Edlai Stevenson. This is like two nation states that have very different philosophies. They don't want to be in the America that we would like to have and have had before. Would like to maybe change it a little bit. I mean, times change, but we got a pretty good idea. They don't want that. They treat it like some sort of alien philosophy, or another country, or an enemy country perhaps. And when you start seeing that, then you realize that really anything can happen, because you go far enough in terms of dehumanizing people, and then you take everything they do and turn it into a threat, even when it isn't, where do you think that's going to go? And some 20-year-old kid's going to flip out and try and make himself famous by shooting that former president? I don't know. There's a lot of conspiracy theories out there, too, especially because the rooftop he was on was so like, why isn't somebody up there? Unfortunately, I don't really buy into a lot of the theories, except that this is just incompetence and not caring. Now, some of the reports said that the Secret Service considered his rallies as loose security. Okay. And also that there was a lot of agents being used other places from the NATO summit, and then Jill was also in Pennsylvania, and this and that. They maybe didn't have enough to go around. Huh. It's an interesting excuse. All right. Here we are back. Thanks a lot for sticking around as we come around the horn there. Well, let's see. I have something that is, I think it's very relevant to what we were talking about liberty. And I did a little research on this because we've talked about it before. And I just want to get it as out there as I can because it bothers me. It is the problem. Remember we've talked about these smart meters to go on your house, right? That allow them to monitor your electric use by hour, and apparently also be able to, I believe this is true, be able to slow down the power usage in certain areas if it gets to be a, quote, emergency, which people in Arvada, I think it was, about a year ago, found out that the definition of emergency, yours and theirs, may be a little different. But so I did a little research on it, and I found that it looks like they're going to just put it in everybody's house. And here's what I found out. That says, I think this is Colorado Sun. Xcel Energy is actively rolling out smart meters across Colorado. Plans to complete the installation for nearly all 1.6 million Colorado customers by end of 2024. Well, I think they were trying to get them out then, 2023. I think they moved in 2024. But here's what they are. Smart meters allow for real-time monitoring of energy usage and enable implementation of time-of-use rates. That's TOU to you and I, which vary the cost of electricity based on demand at different times of the day. This system aims to encourage customers to use electricity during off-peak hours when it is cheaper and reduce consumption during peak hours when it is more expensive. Peak hours typically run from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. on weekdays. There's that. Now, is there a part in there that kind of catches your eye? It does mine. It's designed to provide greater transparency. Oh, sorry, that's my next thing. It's designed to encourage customers to use electricity during off-peak hours. Golly, that sounds really good. Just encouraging you. I would prefer if they just ran maybe a commercial on the radio or maybe a billboard. But see, they're not really trying to encourage you. They're trying to regulate you and charge you into it. I don't know what the problem is with these folks, but it's going crazy. This Public Utilities Commission that's supposed to save us from rate increases and keep the monopoly of the power companies that we have allowed under control has just flipped into a climate change, you name it. We don't want to use any electricity unless it's, I guess you use some electricity to power something with electric vehicles. I don't know. Here's what I thought was interesting. This project involves an investment with the Public Utilities Commission, supposed to work for you, authorizing up to $419 million for the installation. The cost will be passed on to customers. Oh. The introduction of smart meters and TOU rates. Remember, that's we're out in the smart end of things where we just use kind of tau. That's what we do. Is designed to provide greater transparency and control over energy usage for consumers and to improve grid reliability by better managing demand and outage responses. Boy, if that isn't just a bunch of humbug, I don't know what is. So they authorized Xcel to spend $419 million to install these things that we probably don't want. That we don't want anyway. I think most of them still want anyway. And that's going to be paid for by us on our power bills. My. What a great idea that is. I don't know. How do they come up with these ideas? I mean, just so helpful. Not only that, but once again, they're trying to encourage you to disregard the liberty you have about what temperature your house is. And they're going to do that by fining you. Is there really anything else? It's a penalty, isn't it? There's no difference between the amount of energy coming in at 4 p.m. and 2 p.m., except that there's a greater load. Now, how do we answer a greater load? I don't know. Let's put our pencils down and think. Oh, I know. We build more power generation facilities. That's how you do that. You don't continue to cut people's life expectancy. Well, I don't life expectancy. Cut down their quality of life instead of doing the obvious thing. And here's something else. That's just going to get worse. As more people get on the grid and more things are on the grid that need power, then this type of thing is going to start messing around with everybody's ability to get power at certain times of the day or whatever. I just don't know what else to say about it. It's a very troubling thing about government regulation and control, because that's what it is. Now, if they could make it illegal, and who knows, that may be coming, for you to use more than a certain amount of power during these peak times, I'm sure they probably would. Why can't we just do what humans have done since we came across ways to generate electricity? Build electrical plants. Now, clean natural gas, of which we have a lot of here in this part of the country, is a pretty good source for that, and can be run with very little pollution or particulates. Now, some clean coal, as they call it, a little dirtier, but still can be pretty much cleaned up. The real key is, of course, nuclear energy. It produces lots of power and almost no environmental effects except for two things. Well, really one, and the second's an accident. The first is that it does generate used fuel. We're not talking about tons of it. That is radioactive and has to be disposed of. That's an issue we have to reach, and we've been disposing of it in abandoned salt mines and things like that. And there's not a ton of it that comes out of these plants. It's the control rods and so forth that are used that eventually become useless as they become more and more radioactive themselves. The other thing, of course, is the downside is that you can have some kind of accident. However, once again, this whole thing we have with the China syndrome. Remember that movie? I'm trying to remember what it was. It was a long time ago. Who was that in there? I can't remember off the top of my head. I can see his face. Was the main guy who was very hysterical. Good actor, though. He was in The Apartment, and it's right on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, that kind of thing doesn't really happen very much. Where the thing melts into the ground, and goes all through the earth to China. Yeah, that isn't really what happens. And the kind of reactor at Chernobyl is different than the kind of reactor that we would be talking about to generate power here. It's not a breeder. We would be using breeder reactors or anything like that. The Fukushima thing, where they were using the ocean water as cooling, because that's what you use the water for when it comes to nuclear, created a problem when the tsunami hit the reactor itself and forced out some of the radioactive water, slightly radioactive water. Now, of course, since that was near Japan, I'm looking at, there's a new movie out called Godzilla -1. I don't know if it's a fiction or if it's a documentary. But anyway, those are very isolated incidents, and they can be worked around. Europe, for a long time, was generating a lot of their power through nuclear. And then, especially the French, and they just kind of went nuts, with this climate change thing. I mean, look at what happened now. Many of you probably see the story that our athletes are taking their own air conditioners with them to stay in Paris because the nut jobs over there, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be so insulting, but come on, don't want to use air conditioning because of the environment. A lot of these environmental claims are specious and not based on great science, and are also much more capable of being solved, if they do exist, through different technology, as opposed to just denying you the use of it. I mean, the French have enough problems. They didn't want to hold the races in the River Seine because it was too dirty. You may have seen that the mayor of London, a lady, offered to swim in the Seine to show that it was safe. And actually she did 3 or 4 days ago. And people were around like going, oh my God, because it's not a clean place to swim. So she was, she took one for the team on that. But at any rate, I mean, we see how this stuff gets out of hand, and we have tools at our disposal that will make this go away. We can keep building power plants. And you can't just build the plants. You've got to improve the entire grid. The delivery, the systems, the subsystems, all of that stuff has to be upgraded. It's not cheap. But you know what might help? $419 million that they're going towards a smart meter might help. It's just, just saying. Don't we think that would be a better use of the money, was to build a new power plant? Oh, wait, they're closing them down. Yeah, you folks up in Craig know how that goes, right? It's some of the stupidest things I've ever seen. California is, of course, on the, right in the middle of the bell curve of stupidity. They are requiring everybody to go electric and not building any electric power, even though they were having brownouts. And even though they were overloading their transmission lines with energy as people were draining it, which made them spark in certain circumstances and start wildfires, because they also wouldn't clear the woodland brush because it was somehow they thought the environment would be. I don't think I ever had a good explanation of that. But it's when you see this and you keep thinking, well, at some point they'll wake up and they'll say, whoa, what have we been doing? Look, this isn't working. This is a big mess. I mean, I don't think that happens with a lot of these people, especially since they don't often have anything to do with the results of the policies. They're insulated from them in some way. I mean, I think if the power gets bad enough that Mark Zuckerberg or some of the, tech titans that live out in California along that little thin strip along the ocean that's almost a different country than a lot of the rest of California, I'm sure they'll come up with a way to get more power. And or, even if it's just more money, they certainly have it. So they can be behind this sort of thing. Just like you can be behind high gas prices if you have $1 billion in the bank. Or you don't have a job that you have to drive for. Not everybody works from home, like I've said before. I don't think you really want your plumber to work from home. Your landscaper has a hard time doing that. They have to haul around all sorts of stuff. They have to have a big truck. Sometimes they have to tow a skid steer, something like that. That kind of price for fuel, especially diesel fuel now, is something that robs them of their profit. Now, what do? They try and charge more because they need to have a profit or there's nobody in business, which eventually just hits all of us anyway. So it's absurd. And California has really shown us the way about what not to do. I mean, what if your purpose in life was to be an example to others? We all have a purpose. Perhaps California's purpose now is to be as an example to others, not of the right things to do, but of the wrong things to do. Remember, they're also not building any more dams. As a matter of fact, they had 2 of the wettest years they've had in a very long time, of which you'd like to collect, water, because there's a shortage out there, had a drought. Did they build any more reservoirs or collection facilities? Oh, no. They haven't built any, I think, since the 80s, because rivers have to run free, because a smelt might be in it or something. They just run free to the ocean. Wow, that water might have some use someplace else. As a matter of fact, if I remember right, I'm going to look this up here. Yeah. They had 2 of the wettest years in history, and they had a specified voter referendum to build dams and aqueducts to store water. Romans are pretty good at building aqueducts, by the way. And instead, he used some of that money to demolish 4 dams on one of the rivers to let them roll free. And, of course, what happened? Well, lakes and things like that built up behind them, they're gone. And, of course, any hydroelectric power that was being generated from those is gone. Saying nothing about, dams many times exist for flood control. That doesn't seem to register with these dudes either. So you can see that logic, experience, and understanding of the environment itself has left the building with many of these folks. I mean, here in Colorado, I know I complain about this all the time. I'm just shocked at how many people go along with this bag thing, where, you can't have a plastic bag. And if you get a paper bag, you have to pay a dime for it, of which the store gets money, and they didn't used to get any money for the bags, and the state gets a little money too. How does that sound? I mean, they didn't used to get bags at all. I mean, we didn't have to pay for bags at all. Now we're paying 10 cents a bag. Part of it goes to the government, part of it goes to the store, and it's the law. It isn't like, what if a grocery store did this? On their own. Things are just like they were. And then, say, one of the grocery store chains decided, well, we're not going to use these bags anymore. So there'll be no plastic bags, and if you don't have a bag of your own, you can buy a bag from us, maybe buy a bag from us, and it might be a 10-cent bag, which will be a paper bag, so that as you get it out of the car, it'll be sure and tear and then fall onto the ground. And when they do that, they get how many more customers, you think? I don't think they get more customers. I think they get less customers. It's just a guess on my part. I haven't run a survey or anything, but it seems to me like something that we could legitimately call common sense. But when they can say, well, I have to do it, I have to make a little extra money off you by selling you a bag before when I used to provide one, and give some to the government. And you know what we have to do for that? By that, I don't mean we. I mean the distributors, the stores, and so forth. Nothing. They have to do less. They remove the bags. And occasionally, I take a plastic bag to the store. I bought a bunch of them from, I won't say where, because I'm afraid they'll stop selling them. They were the same T-shirt type bags, right? That's what they call them, where they have the 2 handles on one side. They'll sort of look like a T-shirt when you hold them up. And they used to hang those on the little hooks that came out from the bagging area so that you just pile stuff in it. Well, they took those out. So even if you have a plastic bag that you could put over there, there's nothing to hang it on. So as you put things in, that bag that has no structural integrity just sags all over the place and things fall out of it, when it used to just sit there and you could pick it up and go. It's a nefarious scheme. I'm sorry, but it says something to me about people's ability to absorb a sort of control that I wouldn't think that Americans would easily do. I mean, I think about the great quote from the great plainsman, Wild Bill Hickok, when they ask him why he was the way he was, living on the plains and gambling, and he got kind of sad towards the end there after he accidentally killed his sheriff's deputy. But at this time, he said, I guess it's because I never really liked being bossed around. See, I used to think that Americans didn't like to be bossed around. They'd get together and agree on a few guidelines and do things, but they didn't elect somebody just to be their boss all the time. You have enough of that at work. And with work, it makes sense, especially private employers. I mean, they're paying the bills. They have some say over things. You don't own the job. They do. So you have to, give them a little wagon room there. But to have just the government just boss you around, like I said, take us back to, I feel like we're back towards the Renaissance or the medieval times where, you trudge down the road to the grocery store with your burlap sack and put your belongings and your purchases in it and trudge home with it over your shoulder. I mean, it seems wrong to me. Now, I may be just way oversensitive to this, but I don't like the precedent. What's next? I mean, it's never enough, is it? Look, folks, you better watch the legislatures out there, particularly the ones that have a lot of Democrats or Democrat control in them. every session, it's something new. Look at all the gun control things we get out of our Colorado legislature this time. Just off the top of my head. And then we have the Public Utilities Commission, supposed to be trying to save us money and not unnecessarily raise our rates, allowing these guys to spend $419 million so that they can charge us more at, quote, peak times, instead of encouraging them to get more power out there. And if we're going to have some of this computer revolution we discussed about with the AI, well, I think I've mentioned this before, artificial intelligence doesn't live in your phone. It doesn't live in your computer. It lives in a big building with a bunch of supercomputers running in it, with a completely different type of chip than you have in your computer at home, made by NVIDIA. They are fast processing units. They use what's called a neural network, which is a little different assembly of the computer chip itself. And NVIDIA, as a matter of fact, has been out there getting their chips more cost-effective and less power consumptive, even though they're getting more powerful themselves. But still, they still eat a lot of power. And you need a lot of them to do these crazy things with artificial intelligence. And if we don't build it, we'll need, what did I say before? I think that by 2030, they estimate if we're going to continue using artificial intelligence in our computers this much, we'll need to have as much power as is generated in Sweden right now added to our existing grid. Where's that going to come from? You get brownouts in some of these places now. The windmills stop turning and freeze up, and people, don't have any power in their houses. What's going to happen with trying to build AI into that? Big computer service centers. And don't think that when they're building these data centers, that they're not building them near places that have the ability to grow in their power needs. I mean, it just touches business, isn't it? They also, I was told, build some of these data storage places and what's going to be some of the storages for the big AI, like Elon Musk is building the biggest AI single computing unit in Memphis. That's his plan. They also put those where natural disasters aren't going to happen. They don't put them in California. They put them in Iowa. And sort of a tornado, and they look around to make sure they're not in Tornado Alley when they do it. They put them there. We should be at least that smart ourselves. Anyway, all I ask you, I can ask reasonably, is pay attention to your legislature.
Hi, folks. Thanks for listening.
We'll be back.
Listen, if you'd like to listen to more and you want to maybe perhaps have someone else listen to our podcast, you can do so either by going right to our webpage, politicalviking.com, or therickWagnerShow.com. Both of them take you there. You can get links right directly to our podcast, or you can hear our podcast on Podbean, on iTunes, and Spotify, and a couple others. So you can find us. We appreciate it if you do. And if you've heard the show, you want somebody else to hear it, that's a good way to send it to them. Thanks for listening.